The daughters of the most feared alien queen vanished, only to be found sheltered against a human's chest. The twin suns of Archidros bled across the sky, painting the jagged cliffs in molten orange and violet. Dust storms prowled the horizon like predators, their growls shaking the ground beneath. Nothing about this planet had ever been kind. It chewed through machines, swallowed ships, and ground men down into bones. Yet in the middle of that merciless wilderness, a lone figure trudged forward, an American named Ethan Cole. His boots crunched over blackened stone as his breath rasped inside the cracked visor of his helmet. A scar ran down his cheek, a mark left by battles long forgotten. By his side padded his loyal companion, Ranger, a German shepherd whose ears flicked at every distant rumble of thunder. The two of them had been stranded for weeks after their shuttle spiraled out of orbit. Supplies were low. The beacon had failed. Hope was something Ethan tried not to measure anymore. Ranger, though, kept him moving. The dog's presence reminded him that he wasn't alone, that maybe, just maybe, survival was still possible. But survival on Archidros meant understanding its rulers. And no ruler was more feared than Queen Cythera. Tales of her cruelty crossed star systems, skin the hue of emerald flame, hair white as fractured starlight, and eyes that could burn through steel. Her wrath had destroyed fleets. Her word alone determined the life or death of entire colonies. And somewhere within the labyrinth of caverns that scarred this planet, she had lost the only thing she valued, her 3 daughters. Whispers among survivors spoke of the princesses as strange, ethereal beings. They were smaller than their mother, their skin and hair reflecting her lineage, but softer, untouched by war. It was said that when they vanished, Cythera's fury tore through the skies for days, storms rising as if the planet itself grieved with her. Ethan didn't care much for alien politics until destiny shoved him into it. It happened in the ruins of an old mining station. The halls were cracked open, metal twisted like bones after a fire. Ethan had searched for scraps, anything Ranger might eat, when the sound reached him, soft, trembling cries. Not the wind, not the groan of old steel. Something alive. Ranger stiffened, hackles raised, tail pointing toward the sound. Ethan followed cautiously, his flashlight beam trembling across debris. The cries grew sharper, higher pitched, and then he saw them. 3 small figures huddled together in the hollow of a collapsed corridor. Their green skin shimmered faintly in the dusty light, their white hair clinging to their tear-streaked faces. Eyes too large for their delicate features blinked up at him in terror. Ethan froze. His brain screamed warnings. These were the daughters of the Queen, the most dangerous being on this planet. But his heart whispered something else. They were children, scared, trembling, lost. Before he could decide, Ranger moved first. The dog padded forward, tail low but wagging gently. He whined softly, crouched down, and nudged one of the little girls with his nose. She flinched, then reached out with hesitant fingers, clutching the fur between her small hands. Ethan swallowed hard. Well, hell, he muttered under his breath. The princesses didn't speak his language, but their fear was universal. When the storm outside roared louder, they pressed closer to him, eyes begging for safety. Against every instinct of survival, Ethan knelt down, arms out. They climbed into his chest like it was the only fortress left in the universe. Their small bodies trembled against him, their alien skin warm despite the cold. Ranger circled them protectively, ears twitching at every echo in the ruins. And Ethan knew, in that moment, he wasn't just a lost man trying to survive. He was now the guardian of the most dangerous secret on Archidros. The daughters of Queen Cythera were alive, and they had chosen him. The suns outside dipped lower, shadows lengthening across the ruins. Somewhere far away, a mother's wrath stirred the ground, searching, screaming across the stars for her lost children. And Ethan held them tighter, realizing his life had just changed forever. The ruins trembled. Somewhere deep beneath the planet's crust, an unnatural rumble tore through the earth, like the growl of a god waking from slumber. Dust shook from the broken ceiling, and the metal walls groaned. Ethan instinctively crouched, wrapping an arm around the 3 small bodies clinging to his chest. Ranger pressed close, teeth bared at the shadows. Ethan's thoughts raced. He wasn't stupid. The moment he saw their faces, those glowing eyes, their impossible resemblance to the Queen, he understood exactly who they were. If Queen Cythera learned that a human had her daughters, she would burn him alive. Slowly, the girls trembled harder as the quake subsided. One hid her face in his torn jacket, another clutched Ranger's ear like a lifeline, and the third simply stared at him with a kind of desperate hope that carved a hole in his chest. "Great," Ethan whispered to himself, forcing a bitter laugh. "I'm already half dead on a rock nobody cares about, and now I've kidnapped royalty." But there was no choice. Leaving them meant death, either by the storm or by the scavengers that prowled this world. Keeping them meant painting a target the size of a galaxy on his back. Either way, he was doomed. Still, his body refused to push them away. Ranger barked sharply, ears pricked toward the jagged gap in the wall. Ethan's eyes followed, and his stomach dropped. Outside, the storm had shifted. The howling winds carried with them an eerie, rhythmic pulse, like the beating of war drums. And in that pulse came a sound no human could mistake, the distant roar of ships cutting through atmosphere. The Queen's hunters. He grabbed what little gear he had left, a cracked energy rifle, a handful of cartridges, and his old satchel. Not much against an empire, but better than nothing. "All right, kids," he muttered, glancing down at the princesses who now looked up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "Looks like you just drafted me into the stupidest war in history." He motioned for them to stay quiet, placing a finger to his lips. To his relief, they understood, or maybe fear taught them silence better than language ever could. Ranger moved first, slipping through the corridor like a shadow. Ethan followed. The three small aliens pressed close, their pale hair fluttering in the stale air. Every step felt heavier, every sound sharper. The mining station wasn't just a ruin anymore. It was a trap. As they neared the broken exit, the first streak of blue light split the sky. A hunter drone, black and angular, swept across the cliffs like a predator bird. Its sensors blinked red, scanning the wreckage. Ethan ducked back inside, heart hammering. The princesses clung tighter. Ranger growled low in his throat. There it was, the first taste of the nightmare he'd invited into his life. If the hunters found them, he was dead. If they didn't, it was only a matter of time before the Queen herself arrived. And yet, against the crushing weight of fear, something unexpected burned inside him. Resolve. He'd spent years drifting from mission to mission, fighting wars that weren't his, losing pieces of himself along the way. But for the first time, he wasn't fighting for orders or money. He was fighting for lives that trusted him without words. Ethan exhaled, shoulders tense. "All right," he whispered to Ranger, to the children, to himself. "We move. We run. And we don't stop." Above them, the drones circled lower, engines screaming like carrion birds closing in on prey. The hunt had begun. The storm outside screamed louder, swallowing the sky in crimson dust. The hunter drones cut through the haze like razors, their searchlights stabbing into the ruins. Ethan pressed his back to the wall, rifle tied against his chest. The princesses huddled behind him. Ranger crouched low, a silent shadow, his teeth glinting in the dim light. The drones weren't just searching randomly. They were triangulating. Every few seconds, the red beams swept closer, lingering on the fractures in the metal, the jagged stone. Ethan knew technology like that. He'd seen it rip insurgents out of caves back on Mars. There was no outrunning it. One of the princesses let out a soft whimper, her small fingers digging into Ethan's torn jacket. The sound was tiny, almost inaudible, but the drone sensors twitched, recalibrated, and the searchlight swung directly toward them. "Damn it," Ethan hissed. The beam lit the corridor in harsh scarlet. A high-pitched tone filled the air as the drone locked onto their heat signatures. "Move," Ethan barked. Ranger lunged forward, barking furiously, drawing the machine's focus. Ethan grabbed the children and bolted down the corridor, his boots pounding against the steel. The drone screeched, firing bolts of searing plasma that scorched the walls inches from their heads. The mining station erupted into chaos. Metal screamed as beams collapsed, showers of sparks raining from broken cables. Ethan ducked and rolled, shielding the princesses with his body. The rifle cracked in his hands. 1, 2, 3 shots. Blue flashes burst against the drone's shield, each hit useless against its armor. Ranger leapt, jaws snapping, and clammed down on a dangling sensor array. The drone jerked violently, sparks spraying as the dog tore the component free. The machine shrieked, its flight stuttering. Ethan seized the chance, slamming his rifle but into the drone's undercarriage, then firing point-blank into its exposed vent. The explosion rocked the corridor, smoke and fire erupting around them. Ranger tumbled back, ears pinned, but landed on his feet. The drone crashed in a storm of sparks, its wreckage hissing on the scorched floor. For a heartbeat, silence returned. Ethan's lungs burned, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned to the children, still pressed against the wall, their small forms trembling, their luminous eyes wide with terror. One of them reached out and touched his scarred cheek with her green fingers, as if to reassure herself he was real. Something in Ethan's chest twisted hard, but the silence didn't last. Outside, more engines roared. He glanced through the shattered wall and saw them. Half a dozen sleek ships descending through the storm, their hulls glowing with the Queen's crest. The first drone had only been a scout. The real hunt was here. Ethan exhaled shakily, then reloaded his rifle. "We're out of time," he muttered. He glanced at Ranger, who met his gaze with steady, unflinching loyalty. Then at the princesses, who clung to each other but never broke their gaze from him. The weight of it crashed down on him. He was no longer just surviving. He was standing between the most feared queen in the galaxy and the only 3 beings she couldn't afford to lose. And he had seconds to decide whether to flee, fight, or gamble everything on a plan that hadn't even formed yet. The storm thundered, the ground quaked, and the hunt closed in. The ships tore through the crimson storm, their engines wailing like monsters set loose. Beams of light swept the ruins, slicing away the shadows Ethan had tried to hide in. The earth itself trembled under their descent. Ethan dragged the princesses deeper into the mining station, every muscle screaming with the weight of urgency. Ranger led the way, barking once, sharply, to keep them moving. The children's small hands clutched his sleeves, their pale hair whipped by the wind rushing in through shattered walls. Then came a voice. It didn't echo like sound. It thundered directly into his skull. "Return them." Ethan staggered, clutching his head as the psychic roar rattled his bones. The princesses whimpered, burying their faces into his chest. Ranger growled, fur bristling, ears flat. The voice was unmistakable. Queen Sithra herself. She was close enough now that her will reached across the ruins like an invisible storm. Ethan's vision blurred for a moment, flashes of imagery stabbing into his mind. A towering figure wreathed in emerald fire, white hair flowing like a river of blades, her eyes glowing with pure fury. And in those images, loss, grief, a mother's scream that had shaken the stars. She wasn't searching. She was hunting. A shadow fell over the mining station as one of the ships landed, its hull cracking against the stone. From its belly poured a squad of armored hunters, tall, black-armored, their weapons glowing with unearthly fire. They spread out with military precision, scanning, advancing, their movements silent but merciless. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. His rifle was useless against this many. His satchel carried no miracle. His dog was loyal, but loyalty didn't stop plasma fire. He had to choose. Now, he could try to run, dart into the storm, gamble on the chaos, maybe vanish into the labyrinth of canyons. But the children couldn't move as fast as him. He'd lose them in minutes. He could fight, but fighting meant dying. And then, against the backdrop of chaos, he looked at the princesses again. 3 small faces, green-skinned and glowing, watching him with absolute trust. No words, just faith. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing down the panic. If he was going to die, it would be on his feet, giving them a chance. "All right," he whispered to Ranger, racking the rifle. "Let's make this count." The hunters moved in, the storm screaming behind them, their leader raising a blade that pulsed with alien fire. The Queen's voice thundered in his mind again. "You will not keep what is mine." Ethan stepped forward anyway, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was protecting something worth dying for. And deep inside, a reckless thought sparked. Maybe even the fiercest queen in the galaxy couldn't break a man who had nothing left to lose. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, for someone standing against the impossible, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting for you. The hunters surged into the ruins like shadows made flesh, their armored boots thundering against the cracked steel. Plasma rifles flared to life, casting eerie blue light across the broken walls. Ethan fired first. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, spitting fire into the storm. One hunter crumpled, sparks cascading as its armor split. But the victory lasted less than a second. The others advanced in perfect formation, their glowing blades humming with deadly promise. Back! Ethan shouted, shoving the princesses behind him. Ranger snarled, hackles raised, the dog's growls filling the air with raw defiance. The firefight exploded. Plasma bolts hissed through the corridors, scorching walls, punching holes in ancient stone. Ethan dove for cover, dragging the children with him, his body shielding them from the storm of energy. Heat seared his skin, the sting of near misses burning through his jacket. Ranger lunged, slamming into one hunter with feral force. His teeth tore at the alien's gauntlet, jerking it sideways just long enough for Ethan to fire a point-blank shot into the enemy's chest. The blast sent the hunter sprawling, armor smoking. But for everyone that fell, more poured from the ship outside. Their discipline was terrifying. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. They advanced with the inevitability of a tide. One of the princesses screamed as a bolt of plasma carved into the wall inches from her face. Ethan spun, grabbed her, and almost collapsed under the weight of realization. He couldn't hold them off forever. And then the ground shook. A voice like thunder cracked through his skull, rattling the walls until dust rained down from the ceiling. The hunters froze, their helmets tilting as though listening. Enough. The sound of it crushed the air from Ethan's lungs. The storm outside split open, a column of emerald fire tearing through the clouds. The hunters lowered their weapons and dropped to one knee, their glowing visors reflecting the storm. Ethan staggered back, heart hammering. He knew what this meant. She was here. Through the dust and fire, the silhouette of the queen herself emerged. Towering, radiant, terrible, skin gleaming like living emerald, hair flowing white as a comet's tail, eyes burning with light that could swallow a manhole. The princesses gasped. Their tiny hands clutched Ethan's arms with desperate force, pressing themselves tighter against him. Not in relief, in terror. That detail hit him harder than any plasma blast. They weren't running to her. They were hiding from her. The realization twisted his gut, shredding the certainty he thought he'd had. He had believed they were only lost. But their fear told a different story. Queen Cythera stepped into the ruins, her gaze sweeping the wreckage. Hunters bowed as she passed, their blades lowered in reverence. Her eyes locked onto Ethan. For a moment, the world narrowed to nothing but that gaze. Two burning stars aimed at his soul. He raised his rifle anyway, even as his hand shook. Behind him, Ranger growled. The children clung tighter. And Ethan understood, whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The ruins held their breath. Dust drifted lazily through the scarlet stormlight as Queen Cythera advanced, every step cracking the stone beneath her. The hunters parted in silence, their armor gleaming like obsidian, their weapons lowered in reverence. Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened, though he knew it was pointless. His rounds had struggled to pierce a drone. Against her, he may as well throw pebbles at a hurricane. But still, his finger hovered on the trigger. The princesses clung tighter, pressing their small bodies in his chest, trembling so violently that he could feel their heartbeat against his ribs. They should have run to her. Every instinct in his mind screamed that children always sought their mother in fear. Yet here they were, hiding, desperate, clutching him as if he were the only anchor in a collapsing world. The truth burned inside him. Whatever else Cythera was, she was not the mother they wanted. Her voice ripped through the ruins, low and resonant, a sound that felt more like an earthquake than words. Human, return what is mine, and I will grant you mercy. The offer dripped with contempt. Mercy from her was as trustworthy as a blade's promise not to cut. Ethan knew that if he let go of them, he'd be ash before his knees hit the ground. He said nothing. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the children. Their eyes met his, huge, luminous, shimmering with fear and something else. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but real. One of them reached up, her tiny fingers brushing his scarred jaw. Another tucked herself under Ranger's protective stance, the dog's warm body shielding her from the Queen's glare. The third whispered something in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. Please, don't leave us. Ethan swallowed hard. For years, he had drifted through life. Wars, contracts, scars, losses. He had carried out orders, saved people he didn't know, killed people he barely remembered. But never had anyone looked at him the way these children did now. Like it mattered. Like his choice determined their entire world. Something inside him snapped into place. Fear didn't vanish. It was still a storm in his veins. But above it rose a fierce, reckless determination. He lowered the rifle slowly, not to surrender, but to shift his grip. He set it aside and instead spread his arms around the princesses, pulling them tighter to his chest. His voice, rough and hoarse, carried through the silence. They're not yours anymore. Gasps rippled through the hunters. Plasma blades hissed to life, raised in outrage. Ranger growled louder, teeth bared, fur standing like bristles. Cythera's eyes narrowed, burning brighter. For the first time, Ethan saw something flicker there. Not just fury, but confusion. Defiance wasn't new to her, but defiance that came from protecting her own blood. That was different. The storm outside screamed, as if the planet itself mirrored her rage. Ethan's chest heaved, but he didn't back down. The children clung to him, their fear slowly shifting into something steadier. Trust. He wasn't just their accidental guardian anymore. He was their shield, and even if it killed him, he would not let go. The sky split open. Lightning poured down in rivers of emerald fire as Queen Cythera's rage ignited the heavens themselves. The ground shuddered beneath her, fractures spiderwebbing across the ruins, glowing faintly with energy too old and alien to comprehend. Her voice struck like a weapon. You dare claim them? Ethan staggered under the weight of it, knees nearly buckling. The air itself thickened, every breath like swallowing molten glass. Ranger barked furiously, a single sound defiant against the storm. The three princesses clung to Ethan, their small hands digging into his jacket, their eyes squeezed shut as if the world itself might collapse. Ethan's mind screamed at him to let go, to surrender, to throw himself down before her and pray for a quick death. But something deeper roared louder, a stubbornness carved from every scar he'd earned, every failure that had once defined him. No, he rasped. His voice shook, but the word landed like stone. They're mine to protect now. Cythera raised her hand. Energy gathered, a storm condensed into her palm. Hunters stepped back, knowing the destruction about to be unleashed. The walls groaned, the storm outside shrieked louder, and the air around Ethan crackled with imminent death. The children cried out, not in fear, but in protest. The eldest flung her tiny arms around Ethan's neck, shielding him with her own body, as if that gesture could stop a goddess's wrath. The middle one pressed herself against Ranger, the dog snarling, refusing to move. The youngest whispered again in her alien tongue, her voice trembling but steady, as though trying to soothe not Ethan, but her mother. For an instant, Cythera froze. The power in her hand flickered. Her burning eyes locked on the sight before her, her daughters choosing a human over their queen. Her lips trembled, not with mercy, but with something raw, something jagged that tore through the armor of fury. Pain. Ethan saw it. He knew it. This wasn't just a tyrant's wrath. This was a mother who had lost control of the only being she truly cared about. And yet, that didn't stop her. With a scream that shook the ruins, Cythera hurled the storm forward. Ethan had no time to think. He shoved the children behind him, Ranger pressing close, his rifle raised though it meant nothing against that power. For one heartbeat, the world became green fire. The blast slammed into him. Pain ripped through every nerve, searing, blinding, overwhelming. He felt himself lifted from the ground, thrown against the cracked wall, his body screaming in protest. His rifle shattered, sparks bursting as metal twisted in his grip. The children screamed his name, or something close enough. Ranger lunged into the flames, his fur singed, snapping at energy itself. When the light faded, Ethan was still standing. Barely. His jacket burned away, his skin scorched, one arm hanging limp. Blood traced lines across his face, but his body had shielded them. He coughed, forced himself upright, and spat blood onto the scorched floor. His voice, hoarse but steady, cut through the crackling silence. "You'll have to kill me to take them." The hunters murmured in shock. None had ever seen a mortal survive her fury. None had ever dared to speak to her like that. Cythera's eyes blazed brighter, her fury a storm barely contained. Yet beneath it burned something else. The sight of a broken human, still standing, still shielding her children, forced something unspoken into the air. The battle wasn't over, but nothing would ever be the same. The ruins steamed in silence. The air smelled of scorched stone and blood. The storm outside reduced to a low rumble, as though the planet itself was catching its breath. Ethan stood swaying, his body battered, every nerve screaming. His burned arm hung useless, his chest ached with each shallow breath, and his vision swam in red and black. Still, he was upright. Still, his body shielded the princesses, who clung to him as if he were the only stable point left in a collapsing world. Ranger limped to his side, fur singed, his flank streaked with blood. But his eyes remained sharp, his growl low and constant. He pressed himself against Ethan's leg, steadying him. The hunters didn't advance. Their visors flickered, as if waiting for a command. For the first time, hesitation rippled through their ranks. They had seen something no soldier of the Queen's court was meant to witness. A mortal surviving her wrath and refusing to bow. Queen Cythera lowered her hand slowly, emerald fire dimming. Her chest rose and fell with labored breaths, her eyes fixed not on Ethan, but on her daughters. The youngest peeked from behind Ethan's burned jacket, her luminous gaze locking on her mother's. Her small hands trembled, yet she didn't step forward. None of them did. That cut deeper than any blade. Cythera's fury faltered under the weight of rejection. "You choose him." Her voice cracked, not in volume, but in emotion, a fracture of disbelief. The eldest clung tighter to Ethan's waist. The middle one pressed her cheek against Ranger's fur, whispering softly, and the youngest shook her head, slow, deliberate. Ethan didn't understand their words, but he understood their choice. And so did Cythera. Her burning gaze shifted back to Ethan. For the first time since she appeared, the fury was clouded by something else. Confusion, wounded pride, and a dangerous new interest. "You are a fool, human," she said, her voice low, trembling like the echo of distant thunder. "But you are not ordinary." The hunters stirred, awaiting her order. She gave none. With a sweep of her cloak, the queen turned. Her silhouette disappeared into the storm, her soldiers retreating silently in her wake. But her last words lingered in the ruins like a curse. "This is not over. Protect them if you dare, but you will learn what it means to defy a queen." The storm swallowed her presence. The light dimmed. Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his burned arm trembling at his side. The children immediately swarmed him, their small hands stroking his face, their alien voices whispering anxiously. Ranger whined and pressed his nose against Ethan's shoulder. He let out a rough laugh, half relief, half exhaustion. "Well," he muttered, voice ragged, "guess I just made myself public enemy #1 in the galaxy." The princesses didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. They clung tighter, their fear slowly softening into something warmer, trust, gratitude, maybe even love. For the first time since crashing on this forsaken planet, Ethan didn't feel completely lost. Broken, yes. Hunted, absolutely. But not lost. Night fell over Archidros like a shroud. The storm finally broke, leaving the sky cracked open with twin moons glowing through the dust. The ruins were silent now. Nothing left but scorched metal, burned stone, and the heavy breaths of those who had survived. Ethan sat with his back against a collapsed beam, his jacket torn and blackened, his skin raw with burns. Ranger lay beside him, resting his head on Ethan's knee, tail thumping weakly in reassurance. The three princesses curled against his chest and sides, their small bodies warm, their eyes wide but calmer than before. For hours, Ethan didn't speak. His mind spun with the images burned into him. The queen's fury, the green fire that should have killed him, the moment he saw her falter, not as a tyrant, but as a mother. He remembered her eyes. Not just rage, not just power. There had been a crack in the armor, and in that crack, he'd seen something he hadn't expected. Pain, loneliness, maybe even love twisted into something violent and broken. Ethan let out a slow breath. He didn't pity her, he couldn't. She was still the most dangerous being he had ever faced. She would come for him again, stronger, relentless. But she wasn't just a monster. She was complicated, and that terrified him even more. The children stirred in their sleep, their small hands gripping his shirt as though he might vanish if they let go. He brushed a strand of white hair from the eldest's face, surprising himself with the tenderness of the motion. He whispered, half to them, half to himself, "You deserve better than this, better than running, better than me." But their breathing slowed, steady and calm, as if they trusted him to be enough, for now. The thought hit him harder than the queen's fire. He mattered to them. In a life filled with loss, scars, and meaningless battles, this was the first time someone, anyone, had looked at him and believed he was their shield, their safe place. Ranger shifted and let out a low whine, as if agreeing with the thought Ethan didn't want to admit. He looked out across the horizon. The moons painted the landscape in pale silver, the jagged cliffs rising like teeth against the sky. Somewhere out there, Queen Sithra prepared her next move. Somewhere out there, her empire stirred, ready to crush him. But for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like he was just running from death. He was running toward something, toward purpose, toward a fight that finally mattered. He tightened his arms around the children and whispered into the night, "Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe." The words weren't a promise he could guarantee, but they were the only truth he had left. And in the ruins of a broken world, truth was enough to keep him standing. Weeks later, the shattered ruins of Arkidros were far behind them. Ethan stood on the edge of a canyon where the sky bled into shades of violet and gold, the twin moons barely visible above the horizon. Ranger sniffed the alien wind, ears perked, tail wagging cautiously. The three princesses chased each other in the sand below, their laughter sharp and musical, the kind of sound Ethan hadn't believed possible in this hostile world. He bore the scars of that night, burns that would never fully heal, a shoulder that would never again lift as it once had. But when he saw them smile, he knew the pain was worth it. Their bond had grown. The eldest was bold now, watching the horizon the way he did, protective even of her younger sisters. The middle child had taken a ranger, the two of them inseparable. And the youngest, she had begun trying to mimic his words, her small voice breaking into English syllables, halting but determined. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, she pointed at him and whispered, "Dad." The word nearly broke him. Ethan turned away quickly, blinking against the sting in his eyes. But the truth was undeniable. He wasn't just their protector anymore. He was their family. But shadows lingered. Sithra's presence haunted every horizon. Her promise, "This is not over," hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Ethan knew she would come, not just for revenge, but because she couldn't bear the thought of losing her daughters forever. When that day came, he would stand again. Weaker, maybe. Outnumbered, certainly. But never alone. He looked at Ranger, at the girls sleeping beside the fire, and allowed himself a rare smile. For once in his life, he had something worth dying for. More than that, something worth living for. He whispered into the quiet night, as if the stars themselves were listening. "Let her come. I'll be ready." And somewhere far beyond that sky, Queen Sithra's eyes opened, her heart torn between wrath and something she refused to name. Their story wasn't finished, but it had already changed everything. Thank you for following this journey. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, for family found in the unlikeliest places, or for the courage to stand against the impossible, this is your story too. Tell me what you thought of Ethan, Sithra, the princesses, and Ranger. And don't forget, subscribe for more stories that defy the stars and ignite the heart.